you've got 4 main lines of your whakapapa, Pauline. Who in your family has shown interest in delving into the family history? Because often in amongst the family, that's a bit sporadic, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm one of 6 living siblings. Oh, actually, sorry, there were 7 of us and there's 5 now. Over the period of my life, there's really only been 2, and that was my sister, my older sister, and one of my cousins who's passed as well. And they were really keen on knowing what was going on, and they dug out a couple of transcripts. But apart from that, very little interest really. And I must say that any interest has really been on the Cotter line and not the other one. So
not the others.
My mum was very reticent about her history. Yeah, strangely enough.
So the Hannahs, the Kemps and the Muirs.
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that a shame? And it's and I'm sure people here this will resonate. It's like we leave it too late. We say, I wish I had asked so and so about that, and now they're dead and we can't ask them. Is that something that resonates with you?
Oh, very much. Very much. And in fact, my mum had a holiday in Australia only a few months before she passed suddenly, and she opened up to my sister who was living over there, my other sister, and said to her, listen carefully, because when I'm gone, this is gone.
Yeah.
And guess what? My sister can't remember the conversation.
No.
Or bugger all of it. So, and so that makes her feel sad too, that she probably should have got a pen and paper out and written frantically.
Yes. Or clicked onto record on her phone.
Yeah, and I'm not blaming her. These are just moments that you look back on, and think, oh, actually, maybe I could have done something different. But when they're gone, they're gone. Yeah.
So let's look at the Cotter line to begin with. So let's have a look at Christopher Francis Cotter, who is your grandfather. What do you know of him?
I know I know a little bit of what he achieved when he arrived in New Zealand, in Christchurch, and I think he took out an electrical engineering, not engineering, but an electrical training to be an electrician, and he worked in Reefton on the electricity there and set up a couple of businesses here, but very little about the man himself and his personality or his history.
Yeah. Well, let's explore some of that, because he arrived... Here's a good photograph. Tell us who they are, working from this end.
So on the left of the family bench there, I don't know what year this was taken in, but I still have that seat, and we still take family photos on it, and I make sure of it.
Fantastic.
On the left we have May Hannah, who is his wife, of course. Then it is Vera, then Mari, then Christopher, and then my father, Jim.
Right, and in this one?
Mari on the left, Jim standing, Christopher, Christine, and Vera.
Right. We will come back to the fact that Mary or May is not in that photograph, but let's go back to Ireland. So Christopher came from Cork, and on the these are wonderful. The passenger lists are tell you so much. He is already described as an electrician, and your great-grandfather is described as a gentleman. So you kind of wonder, so he's come from actually quite a privileged background, and maybe have had that electrical training back there.
Right.
But I'm interested that you say that he went to Reefton. We know about Reefton. Who knows about Reefton? It was it was the first town in New Zealand in 1888 to have public electricity. So he was a man who kind of knew where he was going.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. He was already an electrician in Ireland when he left.
Yes. So let's also now return to that photograph. There is detail of the wedding, but also the decree nisi is granted. What do you know about those circumstances?
Well, very little until my sister and cousin accessed the divorce documents of the court proceedings. But even then, that's quite a clinical, analysis. But it was pretty much swept under the carpet, very much swept under the carpet. And I didn't even know until I was probably in my 20s or 30s that it had even happened. And, of course, being a Catholic family, Chris was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, and the repercussions of that meant that Jim could not go to St. Bede's. He had to go to Christ's College.
It is really quite interesting, isn't it? In that it was Mary, Hannah, she was the adulterer. That's what he claimed in the divorce papers. Well, presumably she was. Did you ever know any of the details of who she ran off with?
No. And I still don't. I mean, all the papers nominate one fellow as a co-respondent, and I won't mention his name because it was never proven, because he disappeared on his push bike and they couldn't catch him. So,
tell the story of when they were trying to serve the divorce papers on him.
Well, it seems to be that I'll call him Granddad Chris because he was Granddad Chris, and he had a private detective and a mate. And apparently, by the looks of things, they staked out a flat in Madras Street, and it was number 543. And weirdly enough, I live at number 571. But anyway, they staked it out, and they were trying to catch him to serve the papers on this suspect. And they finally, I think they spent many occasions actually. They spent a lot of time on this. One day, here comes Ray, I'll call him Ray, along Madras Street on his bike. And when one of the fellows approached him with the papers, he took off on his push bike, and they never saw him again. So the co-respondent had vanished. So, but in those days, you've got to remember that to get divorced, there had to be someone in the wrong. You couldn't just agree to divorce, like I very cleverly did. I tell you what, you save a fortune as well. I mean, goodness knows what he spent on it. It was a very long court case, and at the beginning it was going to have a jury by the looks of it. Gosh. So,
big story. So as far as so he also got custody of the children. And
she was evicted from the home and from the children, and had no income. And in the documents, it appears that she was living purely on charity, and she would go from. It was common in those days for widows to rent out a room in the house to other women who were in dire need. And she was paying at that stage 10 shillings a week, and it looks like she would get the room, pay the first week's rent, and that was it. And she'd live on the story that she was waiting for him to cough up some money for the rent, which he never did. And 3 months later, she'd get the boot, and she'd go into a similar situation with another 10 shillings. So it was very difficult, and her two sisters basically supported her with food and clothing. Yeah.
Did you know her?
I knew her when she was elderly, so only when she came to babysit on the odd Saturday night. And she had a lovely, warm, bubbly personality. That's what I remember of her. Look, she smoked like a chimney. She had a real rattly cough. That's what I remember about her. And when Mum and Dad had gone, she'd go, "Here we are, you can have a puff, but don't tell your parents." And we thought she was neat because of that, God knows if anything happened and we'd played up, because she was very, very small and frail and fine-boned. Yeah.
So moving on to your grandfather, anyone who's lived in Christchurch for any time knows Cotter's Electrical.
Oh, I hope so. They service what they sell,
He was.
Oh, in fact, can I just interject and say that my daughter Lana here is a fourth generation Cotter's Electrical employee, actually. So
yay,
yeah.
He was quite remarkable as an entrepreneur. I mean, obviously, he was bringing things out like this. I mean, it's marvellous to see all those advertisements, isn't it? You can ease her housework. Consider the time, worry, and labour you will save the little lady of the house if you buy her an electric iron. Oh, hopefully times have changed. Let's go on to...
Hang on a minute. You
Yeah.
must have the electric light put in. Why not have it done now at reasonable cost? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
The dark days are here, but there is still time to have electric light.
Yeah.
So they actually
Well-
did the electrical wiring in the houses and things. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Well, the dark days are coming, but also the next set of ads is before spring. Come on.
Yes.
So he understood marketing.
Yes.
He did.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found intriguing about him, if we go to the next
So
slide.
also just that one there,
Huh?
all makes of storage batteries recharged and overhauled. So they actually serviced batteries as well, and they were rechargeable.
Mm.
I don't know much about them. Interesting. So that was called the Vulcan battery, I think.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Vulcan.
The Vulcan battery?
Yes, and
You're
they
well-informed.
set up manufacturing in what is now the Mackenzie and Willis building. So you had the Cotters building, which is the facade is still there,
Yeah.
and the Mackenzie and Willis building. It was quite a big factory with women working in there, a lot of women assembling them, just from the old pictures that I've seen.
Right.
Yeah.
He must have brought some capital with him. And perhaps that's having a gentleman as the father. Maybe there was a bit of family capital.
Do you know? Did he bring money? Okay. That's a shame.
But he didn't confine himself to New Zealand. He was very interested to find out what was else going on in the rest of the world, and so he travelled. Also, I think those reports show that he must have already become quite a prominent person in the community, because the press is covering him and covering, all his activities. He went to Germany to find out what was going on there.
You want me to read these out?
Yeah.
He was impressed with the way in which Herr Adolf Hitler was inspiring the Germans to the task of the reconstruction of their country. It should be borne in mind that Germany had been impoverished by the war and had been kept down ever since. And then another comment here is, Hitler is being rather laughed at and joked about, said Mr. Cotter, with his salutes and his uniforms. He perhaps does not suit our ideas. We criticised and scoffed at Mussolini at first. Perhaps we shall come to regard Hitler in a few years as we look now on Mussolini.
But he wouldn't have been alone in forming those sorts of impressions in the early 30s. But I understand that he brought back from Germany, was he an industrial chemist?
Did he?
I didn't know that.
No.
To work for him?
I didn't know that for sure. My brother just mentioned that to me probably last week when I talked about him having gone to Germany.
Right.
And yeah, so interesting.
Interesting. I just wondered if there was any talk about that, or how that chemist was received, particularly as we moved into World War II.
So he would have come back in 1933. So that was pre-events as well. So I have no idea how, because as I say, I didn't even know that.
Right.
But my brother did mention that, and I shouldn't be speaking for him, he's not here, but he said to me that the chemist was fairly pro-Hitler. But when he came back and settled here and the events unfurled, he totally turned against him.
Right.
So that's interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah. Let's move to your father, Jim. He was known as Jim.
Mm-hmm.
He joined the Royal Navy. This was before he was married. Why not the New Zealand Navy? Do you know?
No.
Did you ever talk to him about his war service?
No, never. And, the only thing that that reminded me and all of us that he actually did go to the war was his old metal trunk. I think it's still sitting over in the batch at Church Bay with J.F. Cotter on it, sub-lieutenant. The only thing he ever told us about his time in the Navy was, and he liked telling this story because it involved the then Minister of Internal Affairs, David Seath, who seemed to be a very good friend because he'd come round to visit us at Hewitt's Road at the house occasionally in what they had then was ministerial limousines. And to get rid of us so they could sit in the lounge and drink whiskey, they'd put the kids in the back of the limo and tell the driver to take us around a few blocks, which we loved. But he used to tell us the story that David Seath was in one ship and Jim was in the other, and they were they used to have, what are those things called that they flash them with Morse code? There's a name for them, but they had those.
Amongst us.
And David Seath was flashing mine, and Dad was going, mine, yes, we know it's yours, but what he was actually meaning was mines. And Dad used to love that story. But it actually does show how dangerous their mission was if they were cruising around in waters with mines in them. But never spoke about the war ever.
No,
never.
That's not uncommon.
That's not uncommon,
no. Moving on, here's a lovely photograph. So, the wedding of your parents.
Yes.
Can you tell us who's from left to right?
No, I don't know the gentleman on the left. And of course, on the...
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and that's Dad, and then Mum
Yes.
and her sister, Enid. Mum only had one sister. But the interesting thing about that picture is that instead of flowers, Mum is holding a bunch of ostrich feathers that her uncle Sid brought back from South Africa because he was an All Black in, it was 1928.
Okay.
And that's... one of my cousins still has that, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's on an ivory handle. Yeah, and why she didn't choose flowers, I don't know, because Mum was a florist. But it was June, maybe there weren't any flowers. But it looks like she's got someone who dressed there, doesn't it? I don't know.
It does, yeah. No, it's magnificent.
Mm.
And also that
It
little
looks like she's about to do the dusting, actually. If only she'd made use of some of those electrical appliances, she'd have more time.
The notice of the death of your grandfather there, it mentions Lewisham. Now, Lewisham, was that quite a grand house?
I don't know. I've never heard
in
of it.
Clyde Road?
Don't know.
So that's a surprise to you that there was a house. I mean, I ask whether it was a grand house because if you give it a name, it's likely to be a grander house.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is where they had the service, the funeral for Christopher.
Mm.
No, I don't know Lewisham. Oh, well,
Right.
there we go. I didn't even know the date that he'd passed, 1952. Yep.
Right. So that's one Irish strand. So let's move to the Hannahs.
Yep.
So, and also from Ireland. And let's go back to your great-great-grandfather, James. We look at the shipping record here. What do you know of him?
Nothing.
Nothing.
No, I didn't even know they were from Ireland.
It's well, they're from County Down.
Right.
Yeah. And a farmer. Now, he'd been married to Mary before he came out and had 3 children. But his first wife died, and he married his second wife, Lucy. And so next down the line was Robert, who was born in around 1850. Let's have a look at the church registers. Sometimes the spelling has changed. Hannah has an H added to it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Now, your Irish antecedents have been Catholic, and you can see there that there's a marriage register. Is it up in here? So Mary. Now, Mary is the one who married Christopher.
So that's
May.
her there, that bottom one, is
Yeah.
it? I thought they were both born in 1881. So 1886.
1886.
Right.
Yeah. So new information. So she also had 2 sisters, Margaret Gertrude and Elizabeth Josephine. What do you know of them?
Nothing really. Oh, I know that. I think the 3 sisters set up a milliner's business. They were milliners, and one of them married an Ardagh, and there's some quite strong family connection with the Ardagh. So they lived over the road, probably their one of the so Dr. Jim Arter, the surgeon.
Okay. Right.
But very little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's another entrepreneurial strand in your family, the Mrs. Hannah.
Ah,
And
wow.
not only did they have a hat shop in Christchurch, they opened up in Dunedin and Timaru and Waimate.
Oh my goodness
Yeah.
me! Well, that's amazing. You found those.
Yeah. They had moderate prices and prompt execution.
Oh.
Here's a wonderful phrase. They look for a legitimate share of public support.
Isn't that interesting?
What would you think that meant?
I don't know. They didn't want to be ripped off, maybe.
Yeah.
But isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? There was a report in the Timaru Herald in 1914, and this is when they were obviously setting up their shop in Timaru, that the shop and window is being fitted in the most approved city style, and it is the intention of the proprietors to run the business on the lines that have earned their Christchurch establishment such extreme popularity.
Oh, wow.
Mm. So they were very smart businesswomen.
So I wonder what the Barlow's buildings were in Colombo Street. 709. Would that be in the central city, I would say, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they opened in High Street at 197 High Street in 1914, and in 1920 they moved to the Barlow's building,
Right.
which was at 709 Colombo Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, very. Oh, sorry. I'm waving this around. Thank you.
So she was just saying they started off in High Street and then moved over to Colombo, and I think that would be near the central city, just on the south side of the square possibly, because the Cotters building is 5'8", what is it, 5'8"1", something like 500 and something, so yeah.
It looks as if they might have given up the business, well, in the Wise's directory, the last appearance of them is 1943, and the Mrs. Hannah in 1933. So there's a good strong line there's a good line of strong women in your family.
Yeah, but when you look at the Timaru Herald 1914, so they obviously went for a reasonable amount of time. They weren't fly-by-nighters, you know.
They certainly were.
And what I wonder if what may have prompted that business to cease would have been when they got married. I don't know, but you know, women didn't tend to work after they got married, did they? That was you switched careers.
Yes. Now, other evidence of other strong women. We have a look. The suffragette petition.
Oh,
yeah. So James's wife Mary signed the petition, the 1893 petition for women's suffrage, living in Stewart Street. That's her address. And her daughter-in-law, Nora, also signed it. And in its research, she said Nora lived in Byron Street in Sydenham, and quite a few women in Byron Street signed the petition. So we've got a good heritage of women's of strong women in your family.
Oh, good on them. Did you have to scroll through 30,000 signatures to find those? Okay, good. Just take it.
Now, what about your mother's line? In the Kemps. What do you know
the
of
interesting
them?
thing is that I've known very little about that line until this project came up, and I was asked to, provide some photos or anything that I had lying around that would help with this research. And I went out to the garage and I found this scroll, which I've had out there for years and never looked at. No one in the family's looked at it, and I don't even know where I got it from. It possibly came from Mum's place when she passed. But it was a family tree of the Muir side. And from that, I learned a little bit. But as I said, Mum never spoke about her side, really. There was only one line, and that was the Bailey line, and they were farmers out at Sprinkston, and I remember going out there a couple of times as a kid, but that was the only line.
Why do you think she was so reticent?
I don't know. I mean, Mum was a very strong woman in her own right and very intelligent woman. I think she just became a subservient wife. I mean, she bore 7 children. There's not much time to sit down and talk about your own history, is there? Maybe, I don't know.
No, not much time to delve into the past. No, interesting.
It is, isn't it?
Mm. So your great-great-grandfather, George, you know where he came from?
Was he Scotland?
From Scotland.
And you see, prior to this, I thought they were Welsh. Prior to digging out that document, I had always believed that Mum's line was Welsh. So there you go.
What made you think that?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Must have got something wrong along the way.
Because that's one of the other things, isn't it, about sort of myths and misinformation that kind of comes down the family and gains traction, and until somebody actually does the research. So yes.
So sorry about that, girls. I put you wrong for so many years.
Let's have a look at the shipping. So he was a gardener. He is down as a gardener. But the other thing that was interesting was that on board he was also the cook.
Ah.
So he was a man of many talents.
Right. From garden to table.
Yeah, well, how very modern of him. Yes.
Ahead of his time.
Yeah, definitely ahead of his time. So he worked as a farm labourer and as a shepherd in New Zealand. Let's have a look. Up in the Ōtautahi Valley. Now this story here, it's worth taking a moment to read it. It's very sad, isn't it?
Oh dear. Oh.
Yeah. So 7 orphans.
Oh.
So did you know that story at all?
No.
Yeah.
No. Oh dear. Tough, isn't it?
Isn't it? Tough life. You wonder what happened to them or how they were cared for in those days.
And whether they were all separated and sent off to foster homes or
that's right.
They were kept as a family. Unlikely in those days, wasn't it? They were farmed out. There was no social services, no support.
No. And is that a contemporary photograph of the cemetery? Yeah. Right.
Oh, well.
Who knew there was a site called Find My Grave?
No.
Well, Annette did, you see. This is the wonderful resources, yeah. So that might be something that somebody in the family might like to follow up. It's a lesson for us all, really, is it? Don't name your children endlessly after the previous generation, because it gets very confusing. But George Jr., this is marvelous.
The first white person.
Yes. Now, this is your great-grandfather, uncle. It's better at keeping track of all of this.
Yes, I know. It is complex, isn't it?
It is very complex, yes. So some members of the Kemp family made their way to Christchurch, coming down from there. So what we're also seeing here is on this side of the family, so your Irish antecedents are Catholic, and now we've got Anglicans and Presbyterians coming into the line.
Yes. And just on that too, I'm wondering, going back to my mum's reticence about her line, because of course she married a Catholic, and that was really no in those days. And so her relationship with my father's father, Chris Cotter, was not good. I don't think he approved of that at all. And so I wonder if Mum just put her line in the back pocket because they were Anglicans and Church of England and not Catholic. Just a thought, you know. And I know that Mum went to church, but she never took communion because she obviously hadn't made her first communion. So
You were just going back to Christopher Cotter. After his divorce, you say he was excommunicated by the church.
yes.
So did he go to church? Did he go to another church?
Well, I just learnt this about 2 days ago from my brother, Al, who said he used to still go to St Mary's Church in Colombo Street there and stand at the back secretly.
That's very poignant, isn't it? Yes, obviously it still meant something to him, but he wouldn't have been able to take communion or really engage in that. Right. Harsh times. So what do you know of your maternal grandfather and grandmother?
Nothing, really. Because I think, well, what I do know is that they passed away within hours of each other.
Yes.
And which was quite bizarre. But I think they passed, I was very young. I would have been maybe 6 or 7, I don't know, but very little.
Right. We can elaborate on that in a moment. Just here's a little bit about Frank's attestation, because he was in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force in World War One. Until some little time ago, I didn't know about military attestations, but they're your record basically if you've served in the military of any kind, and they are full of information, including things like here, particularly the medical examinations. There's a wonderful one here. What does he say here? Has he got a hernia? It's got varicose veins, hemorrhoids, or is he free from? But the other one is, are there any slight defects, but not sufficient to cause rejection? And clearly there were no even slight defects in Frank, which was great. He wrote a will. It's a little bit hard to read on here, but he died, and his will said that his estate would go to his wife Lily, provided she lived for more than 7 days following his death. But she didn't. She died in a very within about 4 days, which was very sad. So your mother, he died on the 4th of June. She died on the 6th of June. So your
2
mother
days.
and your aunt were suddenly orphans.
Yes.
Yeah. Did she ever talk about that?
No. Never.
Never talked about the sudden death of her parents.
No.
Isn't that interesting? She was a woman who was going to get on with life,
Yeah.
wasn't she? Yes.
So did they both pass suddenly?
Yes. The Muirs. Now, this is the line that you know a little bit more about. So it's your Peter and Margaret were your great-great-grandparents. What do you know of them?
Nothing.
Right. Where they came from?
Well, they were Scotland as well.
They
weren't
were also Scotland. Yes. Isn't that a marvellous name for a ship? A chariot of fire. You'd hope not. So they first settled. They were assisted immigrants. On that ship, there were 460 passengers, and 430 of them were assisted immigrants.
And what does that mean? They were partly funded to come out?
They were partly funded, yes, to come out. Yes. So it was like, encouraging immigration.
Right, yeah.
And I think quite a lot of people came out from Scotland. So they arrived in Lyttelton on the 29th of January in 1863. And at first they settled in Akaroa. Marvellous map. At what's now known as Children's Bay. They had children how many children did they have when they came? They had the 3 sons. And then they had a further 7 children.
Mm. What a shame the electrical appliances weren't invented then. With 10 children living in, it would have been fairly rural, isolated area then.
Yes, absolutely.
Akaroa.
Yeah. And eventually, and again, what we've got here now is they were married in a Presbyterian church, and buried in. They moved to Springston, and they were buried in an Anglican church. So let's have a look at the photograph that you have. So it was Archibald and Mary, and then there's 2nd generation sisters. So Lily, who was a Muir, so that brings that into the family. It was Margaret, and she was the mother of the 10 children. You can see she's got quite a doughty face, isn't she?
She's really pissed off, I can see that. How did this happen?
I could not have used that word.
No, she's probably just plumb exhausted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so in that one in the middle, Irene, who was Auntie Reen on the right, she married Sid Carlton, who became the All Black. And I can see a strong resemblance to you, Sina. Very strong, yeah.
Yeah. So do you have quite a collection of photographs?
Not a whole lot, no. In fact, some of those came from the document that Archie drew up, the family tree that he did that I found in the bookcase in the garage. Yeah. So I think these have all come from there. But no, very few.
Right. Well, you'll just have to get searching. Well, here's now Peter. They moved to Springston, and here is a lovely story about forming a sparrow club. Would you like to read that?
I'm going to read it out. Okay.
Do.
And this is from the Akaroa Mail and the Banks Peninsula Advertiser in 1882. A meeting of those interested in forming a sparrow club at Springston was held in the schoolroom on Tuesday evening last. There was a large attendance, nearly every farmer in the district being present. Mr. Gammock was voted to the chair. Mr. Muir brought to the meeting a sack of birds that had been taken off one small field during the last 3 days. I thought this was going to be friendly and pro-sparrow, but I don't think it is. It was resolved to form a club and take combined action to abate the small birds' nuisance. A committee was appointed to assist Mr. Muir in preparing the poisoned grain, and the board was asked for one of the empty cottages as a depot for preparing and selling the grain. It was resolved that this meeting appoint a committee to draw up a petition to the General Assembly requesting them to pass an act giving a majority of the ratepayers in any district power to levy a rate for the suppression of the small birds nuisance. It was resolved to petition the government to abolish all acclimatisation societies and that all fees, fines and licences now paid to them be handed over to some local body to be expended in undoing the injury inflicted on the farming community by the importation of sparrows, linnets and other noxious birds. It was decided that grain should be ready for distribution on next Friday morning.
Yeah, they didn't muck about, did they?
No.
Next Friday morning,
put like the
poisoned grain will be available.
The what was that rabbit virus, the Kalinsky virus, and get the blender out, you know. Wouldn't want to get that poison.
That was another chapter, wasn't it?
It was, but you wouldn't want to get that poisoned grain mixed up with the stuff that went off to the bakery, would you?
You wouldn't.
Very risky business. But I mean, that shows a very strong environmental focus. I mean, obviously it was a financial focus at the end of the day, but you know, I wonder if it got any traction.
It's also the story of introducing species to New Zealand, which we've done rather a lot. and then finding that they've become more of a nuisance than a benefit.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and another notice that Annette found, which is marvellous and blunt in a way that you wouldn't have these days, is in the next one. Come home at once. Your father is dead.
Oh.
So when Peter died, clearly he was Archie was away from home, and that was put in the papers to alert him to the fact that his father had died.
Right. Oh, wow.
Blunt.
Yes.
Yep. We are slightly constrained for time, so that's been a very, very quick whip round of your sort of family history. But the next slide will show how families disperse. So these are all your relatives.
Oh. And Invercargill.
Yeah, so there's plenty of opportunity for you to be searching up and down the country, or share the load to search more into your family background.
Right.
Have there been some surprises today, Pauline?
Yes, I think. Oh, sorry. Yes, there have been. I mean, I'm a bit overwhelmed, really, with everything that you've managed to, and yet you've managed to dig out, and it's very complicated. I think, particularly having that line of 10 of my mum's grandparents. Was it? No, yeah, line had.
Yes. The Muirs.
Yeah, the great grandparents had 10. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's, and also the
great grandparents.
The names, there's several Archies in there, and one of them was actually Claude, but he called himself Archie, so it's quite confusing. But no, and particularly that one with the 7 orphans, that's very, very sad. I mean, that's
isn't it?
Yeah,
and you do wonder what happened to them, and as you said, who looked after them, who took them in?
Yes.
Did they have to go to a home of some kind?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that might be something that we look into and see what came of them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Do you think after today, Pauline, you might start doing a bit more digging into the family? I mean, obviously, you've now got some really good records that Annette has managed to find.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's actually important because the fact that I've got family here that are interested, and you've done a lot of the spade work there, I think it's a really interesting thing to pick up, because our genealogy means a lot to us when we have our own children, and we've got to pass things down, and they have theirs. Yeah. And so I will. Yeah.
Well, like the Māori whakatauki about kaumua kaumuri, which is, look to your past to understand your present and look into the future.
Yes.
So there's so on that note, thank you very much for your time today, and thanks for sharing your history and your stories.
Well, I'm the one that's grateful, and I'd like to thank you and Annette for all the work that you've done on this, and for you taking an interest as well in this sort of thing. It's just marvellous. And it is not easy to get this information. It's easier for our generation because we've got a lot of records, recorded electronically now and for perpetuity. But this stuff involved a lot of work, and so I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity too. So thank you.